Before we begin this incredible true story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another amazing story like this one. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as James Mitchell stood at his post, his uniform pressed to perfection. He had served as a royal guard for 12 years, and every single day felt like an honor. The crisp autumn air filled his lungs as he watched the crowd gathering outside the palace gates. Tourists from around the world had come to witness the changing of the guard, their cameras ready to capture every moment. James was 42 years old, a father of 2, and he took his duty seriously. His wife Sarah often joked that he loved his job more than anything else in the world, but James would always correct her. He loved his family most, but protecting others came as a close second. It was in his blood. His father had been a guard, and his grandfather before him. The Mitchell family had a long history of service. James wore that legacy with pride. As the ceremony began, James maintained his position with military precision. His eyes scanned the crowd constantly, trained to spot anything unusual. Most days were routine. Tourists would take photos, children would wave, and everything would proceed without incident. But something felt different today. James couldn't quite put his finger on it, but his instincts were sending him signals. After years of service, he had learned to trust that inner voice. The crowd was larger than usual, packed tightly against the barriers. Families stood shoulder to shoulder, children sitting on their parents' shoulders to get a better view. James noticed a young mother struggling to keep track of her 3 kids. The oldest, a boy around 8 years old, was pulling away from her grip, trying to get closer to the guards. The woman looked exhausted, juggling a baby in one arm while her middle child clung to her leg. James made a mental note of the family but continued his duties. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, the guards moving in perfect synchronization. The crowd applauded and cameras flashed. Everything seemed normal, yet that uneasy feeling in James's chest wouldn't go away. He had learned long ago that a good guard never ignores their gut instinct. Something was about to happen. He could feel it in his bones, like the air before a storm. His muscles tensed slightly, ready to react at a moment's notice, even though he had no idea what was coming. The ceremony was reaching its conclusion when James heard it. A loud bang echoed through the square, sharp and sudden like a gunshot. The crowd gasped collectively, and panic rippled through the masses like a wave. People began pushing and shoving, trying to move away from the sound. James's training kicked in immediately. His eyes darted toward the source of the noise. His heart dropped. A delivery truck had backfired on the main road adjacent to the palace grounds. The driver looked confused and apologetic, but the damage was already done. The crowd had erupted into chaos. Parents grabbed their children, people screamed, and the orderly gathering transformed into a stampede. The barriers began to shake under the pressure of hundreds of people pushing against them. James watched in horror as the barriers gave way. Metal fencing crashed to the ground and people stumbled over it, falling onto the pavement. In the midst of the chaos, James saw something that made his blood run cold. The young boy he had noticed earlier, 8-year-old who had been pulling away from his mother, had broken free during the panic. The child was running, terrified and disoriented, heading straight toward the main road where traffic was still moving at full speed. Without thinking, without hesitation, James broke formation. This was against protocol. Guards were supposed to maintain their positions unless given direct orders. But James wasn't thinking about protocols or rules. He was thinking about that little boy, about his own children at home. It's about every parent's worst nightmare unfolding before his eyes. James ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life. His polished boots pounded against the pavement, his ceremonial uniform flowing behind him. The distance between him and the boy was roughly 200 yards. Behind him, he could hear his fellow guards shouting, could hear the crowd's screams mixing with the sound of approaching vehicles. Time seemed to slow down, yet everything was happening so fast. The boy reached the edge of the road, completely unaware of the danger. A car was approaching from the left, the driver distracted and moving too fast. James pushed his legs harder, his lungs burning, his heart hammering in his chest. He had to reach the child. He had to. There was no other option. Failure wasn't something he could accept. Not when a young life hung in the balance. Every step brought him closer. But would it be enough? James's muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain. The boy stepped off the curb, one foot already in the road. The approaching car was only seconds away, its horn blaring as the driver finally noticed the child. But it was too late for the car to stop. The physics were simple and cruel. At that speed, with that distance, the vehicle couldn't brake in time. With a final burst of energy, James launched himself forward. His arms stretched out, reaching for the boy. Time seemed to freeze for a single heartbeat. Then James's hands found the child's shoulders, and he pulled with every ounce of strength he had left. The boy flew backward into James's arms, and they both tumbled onto the sidewalk. The car rushed past, missing them by inches. The wind from the vehicle whipped James's face as he held the boy tight against his chest, shielding him with his own body. They rolled several times before coming to a stop against a street lamppost. James felt a sharp, intense pain shoot through his back and shoulder, but his first thought wasn't for himself. "Are you okay?" James asked the boy, his voice urgent and breathless. He quickly checked the child for injuries, his trained hands moving efficiently despite his own pain. The boy was crying, terrified, but appeared to be unharmed. Not a scratch, not a bruise. James had managed to protect him completely. The boy's mother came running, tears streaming down her face, her baby still in her arms. She dropped to her knees beside them, sobbing as she reached for her son. Other guards arrived along with security personnel and concerned bystanders. Someone called for medical assistance. The crowd, which had scattered in panic moments before, now gathered around them, phones recording, voices murmuring in amazement. James tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was fading, and reality was setting in. The pain in his back intensified, spreading through his body like fire. He looked down and noticed his uniform was torn, blood seeping through the fabric near his ribs. During the tumble, he must have hit something sharp, perhaps the broken barrier or debris on the ground. But more concerning was the numbness beginning to creep into his lower body, sensation that filled him with a dread far worse than any physical pain. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours to James. He lay on the ground, surrounded by concerned faces, trying to maintain his composure. A fellow guard, Marcus, knelt beside him, holding his hand. "Stay with us, James," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, mate. You saved that boy. Just hold on." The paramedics worked quickly, assessing James's condition. Their faces were professional masks, but James could read the concern in their eyes. They asked him questions about his pain levels, about what he could feel. When they asked him to move his toes, James tried. He tried with everything he had, but nothing happened. The numbness had spread, and a cold realization settled over him like a heavy blanket. At the hospital, Sarah arrived in a panic, still in her work clothes. Having driven straight from her office when she received the call, she burst into the emergency room, her face pale with worry. "James?" she cried out, rushing to his side. He managed a weak smile for her, trying to appear stronger than he felt. "I'm okay," he lied. "The boy is safe. That's what matters." The doctors performed tests, scans, and examinations. James was moved to a private room where a specialist sat down with him and Sarah. Dr. Harrison was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, but his words were devastating. The impact against the street lamppost had caused damage to James's spinal cord. The injury was severe, located at the lower thoracic region. "The next few days will be critical," Dr. Harrison explained carefully. "There's swelling around the injury site, which is contributing to the loss of sensation and mobility. Once the swelling reduces, we'll have a better understanding of the permanent damage. However, I need you to prepare yourselves for the possibility that James may not regain full use of his legs." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, and tears spilled down her cheeks. James felt his world tilting on its axis. Not walk again? The words seemed impossible, unreal. He was a guard. He stood for hours each day. He ran, he trained, he was physically fit and capable. How could this be happening? But even as the shock settled over him, James thought about the little boy's face. He remembered the feel of the child in his arms, safe and unharmed. He remembered the mother's tears of relief. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the grief for the life he might be losing, James knew he would make the same choice again. The days that followed were the darkest of James's life. The swelling in his spine reduced slowly, but the news didn't improve. Physical therapists came to assess him, their optimism forced and their prognoses guarded. James underwent surgery to stabilize his spine, and while the procedure was successful, it couldn't reverse the damage that had already been done. 3 weeks after the incident, Dr. Harrison delivered the final verdict. James would be paralyzed from the waist down. He would need a wheelchair for the rest of his life. His career as a Royal Guard was over. The life he had known, the identity he had built for 42 years, was gone in an instant. Sarah never left his side. She slept in a chair beside his hospital bed, held his hand through the dark nights when despair threatened to swallow him whole, and reminded him every day that he was still the same man she had fallen in love with. His children visited, his daughter Emma climbing carefully onto his bed to hug him. His son David trying to be brave but crying when he thought his father wasn't looking. The boy, whom James had saved, came to visit with his mother. His name was Oliver, and he brought a drawing he had made. It showed a guard with a cape, flying through the air like a superhero. "You saved my life," Oliver said simply, his young voice filled with awe. "You're my hero." James looked at the drawing, at this child who was alive and healthy because of a choice he had made in a split second. Oliver's mother, whose name was Catherine, could barely speak through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me my son back. I know what it cost you, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure Oliver knows what you sacrificed for him." The media coverage was intense. News outlets around the world ran the story of the heroic Royal Guard who gave up his ability to walk to save a child. Videos of the rescue went viral. James was called a hero, awarded commendations, and praised by officials. The royal family sent personal letters of gratitude. People stopped Sarah on the street to ask about James, to send their well wishes. But James struggled to feel like a hero. He felt angry sometimes. Angry at the universe, at the unfairness of it all. He had nightmares about running and waking up to remember that he never would again. He went through stages of grief for his old life, mourning the loss of his independence, his career, his physical capability. Sarah and his family were patient, loving, and steadfast. But James had to fight his own internal battle. 6 months passed, and James slowly began to rebuild his life. Physical therapy taught him how to navigate the world from a wheelchair. He learned to adapt, to find new ways of doing things he had taken for granted. Some days were harder than others. Some days, he broke down completely. But other days, he found glimmers of hope, small victories that reminded him he was still himself. Oliver and his family became close friends with. James and Sarah, the boy, visited regularly, sharing stories from school, showing James his report cards, talking about his dreams of becoming a guard himself one day. Watching Oliver grow and thrive gave James a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. This child's life, this future full of possibilities, existed because of him. James eventually found a new role working with the palace security team in an advisory capacity. He couldn't stand guard anymore, but his experience and knowledge were valuable. He trained new recruits, taught them about instinct and awareness, and shared his story as a reminder that being a guard meant more than just standing in a uniform. It meant being willing to sacrifice everything to protect others. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, a ceremony was held in James's honor. He was awarded the highest civilian medal for bravery. As he sat in his wheelchair on the palace grounds where it had all happened, surrounded by his family, his fellow guards, and young Oliver standing proudly beside him, James finally made peace with his new reality. He had lost the use of his legs, but he had saved a life. He had lost his career, but he had gained a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. He was still a husband, still a father, still a man of honor and courage. The wheelchair didn't define him. His character did. His choices did. His heart did. Sarah squeezed his hand as the medal was placed around his neck, and James looked out at the crowd. He saw his children beaming with pride. He saw Oliver, alive and healthy and full of life. He saw his fellow guards standing at attention, saluting him with tears in their eyes. And James realized something profound. He hadn't lost everything. He had simply traded one kind of strength for another. Years would pass. Oliver would grow up to become a royal guard himself, inspired by the man who saved his life. James would be there at his graduation ceremony, proud as any father. The story of the guard who sprinted 200 yards and gave up his ability to walk would be told and retold, inspiring countless others. But for James, the real story was simpler. It was about a moment when he had to choose between his own well-being and a child's life, and he chose love. He chose sacrifice. He chose to be exactly who he had always been: a protector, a guardian, a hero. Not because of what he could do with his legs, but because of what he carried in his heart, and that, James finally understood, could never be taken away.